Before you think of the phone in your pocket, before you think of apps or touchscreens or the word smartphone, think about what the world looked like when none of that existed. Think about a time when people carried a small, solid object, a device that did one thing and did it perfectly. A device so reliable, so universal, that it transcended language and continent and class. A device that for a brief, extraordinary window of human history connected more of the human race than any single invention before it. That device was made by a company most people today associate with failure. That is the first thing you need to understand. Because the story of Nokia is not a story about failure. It is a story about what happens when something becomes so dominant, so embedded in the world, that it can no longer see the world changing around it. And by the time it looked up, the world had already moved on. But we're not starting there. We're starting somewhere else entirely. We're starting in a forest. Finland in 1865 is not yet a country. It is a grand duchy, a territory under the sovereignty of the Russian Empire, a cold northern land that most of Europe considers remote, provincial, quiet. The forests here are immense. They crowd the edges of thousands of lakes. They hold silence in a way that feels deliberate, not empty, but full of something withheld. The Finns have a word for it. They call it the quiet that precedes speech. In this landscape, beside a river called the Nokian Virta, in the Pirkanmaa region of what will one day be southern Finland, a man named Frederick Idestam builds a mill. Not a mill for grain, a pulp mill, paper pulp. The kind of industrial operation that transforms raw timber into the material of civilization. Newspapers, books, documents, correspondence, the infrastructure of communication. There is something poetic about that. Nokia's first product was, in a sense, the medium through which the world sent messages. Idestam's mill grows. It becomes a company. The company becomes a conglomerate. Over the following century, Nokia expands into rubber products, boots and tires, and then into cable manufacturing, electricity, electronics. It is not unusual for a European industrial company of this era to sprawl across industries. Nokia is not yet a technology company. It is not yet anything you would recognize. It is simply a large Finnish corporation trying to survive in a world that rewards size and adaptability. The 20th century is not kind to Finnish industry. 2 wars, Soviet pressure, economic volatility. Nokia absorbs the blows, restructures, persists. By the 1970s, Nokia is a diversified conglomerate making television sets, paper, rubber boots, and telecommunications cables. It is a peculiar collection of businesses connected mainly by the logic of Finnish industrial history and the pragmatic need to keep the enterprise alive. And then, slowly, almost accidentally, one division begins to matter more than the others. In the 1960s, Nokia acquires a company called Finnish Cable Works, which has been experimenting with radio telephony. The Finnish military uses Nokia electronics. The Finnish government uses Nokia cable infrastructure. And quietly, without much fanfare, Nokia begins building the knowledge base that will eventually transform it. The pivotal moment comes not from genius or strategy. It comes from geography. Finland shares one of the longest borders in Europe with the Soviet Union. It is a country acutely aware of its own vulnerability. And yet, because of this vulnerability, Finland develops something rare. Genuine political and economic independence within the constraints of its situation. The Finns are pragmatic in a way that feels almost surgical. They do not waste motion. They do not waste words. And they do not waste industrial capacity. When the Nordic countries begin the first serious experiments in mobile telephony in the late 1970s, Nokia is already there. Not because it planned to be, but because it had been building the infrastructure, the cables, the radio equipment, the technical knowledge, for decades. In 1979, Nokia and a company called Salora form a joint venture called Mobira. Their first product is a car phone. It weighs about 10 kilograms. Nobody calls this the beginning of something. It is simply the next thing. But there is a man working in Nokia's electronics division during this period, who will later say that he felt something shift. Something in the way the engineers talked about radio communication. Something in the weight of the problems they were trying to solve. He will say, it felt like we were standing at the edge of something very large, and none of us could see the other side. His name is Jorma. We will come back to him. The Nordic Mobile Telephone Network, NMT, launches in 1981. It is the world's first automatic international mobile phone network. It covers Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland. It works across borders. You can drive from Stockholm to Helsinki and maintain a call the entire way. This seems modest now. It was, at the time, extraordinary. The network requires handsets. Nokia builds handsets. And here, in this specific narrow, cold northern market, Nokia begins to develop something that will carry it further than any forest or cable or rubber boot ever could. It develops an understanding of what people actually want from a communication device. Not just that it works, that it fits. The Mobira Cityman 900, released in 1987, becomes the first genuinely portable Nokia phone. It weighs 800 grams. It costs more than most Finns earn in a month. And it sells. Not to ordinary people, to executives, to politicians, to people for whom the ability to make a call from a moving vehicle represents something beyond communication. It represents status, power, the compression of distance into something manageable. A photograph circulates of Mikhail Gorbachev using one during a visit to Helsinki. The image carries no caption. It needs none. The object in his hand is its own message. In 1989, a young engineer named Anssi joins Nokia's electronics division in Salo, a town on the southwestern coast of Finland. The town smells of sea salt and machine oil. The Nokia factory there is expanding rapidly. New production lines, new contracts, a growing sense that something significant is gathering momentum. Ansi's job is quality control on circuit boards. He sits at a bench 8 hours a day, examining components under magnification, recording deviations, passing or failing units according to tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. The work is quiet, precise, almost meditative. He does not think of himself as being at the center of a revolution. Nobody in Salo does. They think of themselves as doing their jobs. What Anssi noticed in those early years is the pace at which the specifications change. A design would arrive from the engineers in Tampere. Quality would begin calibrating to it. And then, 3 months later, a new design would arrive, and they would start again. The phones were not improving slowly. They were improving in lurches. Each iteration a significant departure from the last. He will later say, "We were building things faster than we understood them." By the early 1990s, Nokia is in financial trouble. The conglomerate model has become a liability. The television business is failing. The paper business is stagnant. The rubber division is profitable but small. And Finland itself is entering a severe recession, triggered partly by the collapse of Soviet trade. Nokia's share price falls dramatically. There are discussions about whether the company can survive in its current form. Into this moment steps Jorma Ollila. He is 40 years old. He's been running Nokia's mobile phones division. He is appointed CEO in 1992, and he does something that most diversified conglomerates are incapable of doing. He makes a clear, irreversible choice. Nokia will be a telecommunications company. Only that. Everything else, the televisions, the cables, the rubber boots, will be sold or closed. The company will concentrate its entire existence on mobile phones and networks. This is not a fashionable strategy in 1992. Mobile telephony is still a niche. Analysts are skeptical. The financial press is cautious, but Ollila is not interested in consensus. He is interested in being right. We chose mobile. We chose one thing. In a world full of companies that chose everything, we chose one thing. The timing is almost perfect, because something is about to change the entire architecture of global communication. Something called GSM. GSM. Global System for Mobile Communications, is a digital standard for mobile telephony, developed collaboratively by European telecommunications authorities in the 1980s and deployed commercially from 1991. It replaces the various analog systems that had fragmented the European market with a single open standard that any manufacturer can build to. This is the moment that separates Nokia from most of its competitors. Nokia has been inside the GSM development process from the beginning. Nokia engineers have sat in the committees. Nokia infrastructure is already designed around the standard. When GSM goes live, Nokia is not catching up. Nokia is already there. More than that, Nokia has understood something that many of its competitors have not. GSM is not just a technical standard, it is a platform for global scale. Any phone built to GSM can work on any GSM network anywhere in the world. The market is not Finland or Scandinavia or Europe. The market is everywhere that puts up a tower. By 1994, Nokia releases the Nokia 2100 series. It is the first Nokia phone to feature the now iconic ringtone. A simple ascending melody derived from Francisco Tárrega's guitar piece, Granvals. And the first to carry the slogan that will define the company for a decade. 2 words. They fit a Nokia phone in the hand. They fit a strategy. They fit a worldview. Nokia had planned to sell 400,000 units of the 2100. They sold 20 million. Something had begun. To understand what Nokia becomes in the late 1990s and early 2000s, you have to hold 2 things in your mind at once. The first is the scale. At Nokia's peak, the company holds roughly 40% of the global mobile phone market. 4 out of every 10 mobile phones sold anywhere on Earth carries a Nokia logo. In some markets, across Africa, across South Asia, across Eastern Europe, the number is higher. There are countries where Nokia is not a brand name. It is simply the word for mobile phone. The second is the speed. This scale is achieved in under a decade. Nokia goes from a struggling Finnish conglomerate to the most valuable company in Europe in a time frame that has almost no precedent in industrial history. In 1998, Nokia overtakes Motorola to become the world's largest mobile phone manufacturer. In 1999, its market capitalization exceeds that of the rest of the Helsinki Stock Exchange combined. At one point, Nokia represents approximately 4% of Finland's entire gross domestic product. A single company. 4% of a nation's economy. This is not a business story. This is something else. The phones themselves tell the story. The Nokia 3310, released in the year 2000, sells 126 million units. It is still, as of this writing, one of the best-selling consumer electronics devices in human history. Its battery lasts for days. Its casing survives drops, spills, minor structural collapses. Owners develop genuine affection for it. Not the performed affection of brand loyalty, but the quiet attachment that forms between a person and a tool that does exactly what it promises every time, without complaint. School children carry them. Fishermen carry them. Nurses, truck drivers, farmers, bankers, soldiers, all carry them. In markets where electricity is unreliable, the 3310's battery life becomes a genuine survival advantage. In conflict zones, aid workers trust it precisely because it is too simple to fail. A device designed in Finland, assembled in factories across 3 continents, carried by people who will never visit Finland and may have only a vague idea where it is. Connecting people. The Nokia campus in Espoo in the early 2000s is, by all accounts, an extraordinary place to work. The company operates with a flatness, a genuine absence of hierarchy. That is unusual for a company of its size. Engineers eat lunch with executives. Product teams have real authority over their roadmaps. There is an atmosphere multiple former employees will later describe of collective purpose, of building something important together. Anssi has been promoted twice since his days at the Salo factory. He now works in product development in Espoo. His office looks out over the lake. In winter, the water freezes solid enough to walk on. He remembers this period clearly, the energy of it, the sense that Nokia was not just ahead of its competitors. It was in a different conversation entirely. The company filed more mobile phone patents per year than most of its rivals managed in 5. Its supply chain was a masterpiece of coordination. Components sourced, assembled, shipped, and delivered with a precision that its competitors spent years trying to replicate. But there is something else he remembers, something harder to name. He remembers the moment when the conversations about what the phone should be, what it might become, began to feel different, more cautious, more defensive, less about what was possible, and more about what was safe. He cannot pinpoint the exact year. It happens gradually, the way all institutional shifts happen, not with a single decision, but with 1,000 small ones, accumulating over time into a new direction that nobody officially chose. In 2002, Nokia launches the Nokia 7650, its first smartphone, the first Nokia phone to run the Symbian operating system, the first with a built-in camera. It is impressive. It is also, in retrospect, the first evidence of a problem that Nokia will never fully solve. Symbian is complicated. It is an operating system designed by engineers for engineers, with an architecture so intricate that writing applications for it requires a level of technical sophistication that limits who can participate. Developers find it difficult. Updates are slow. The user interface, the thing that ordinary people actually touch and navigate, is functional, but not elegant. Nokia knows this. Internal documents from this period show an awareness that Symbian is a constraint. There are discussions about alternatives. There are teams working on different approaches. But here is the trap that success builds. Nokia's hardware excellence had generated a culture of hardware primacy. The company that had mastered the physical form of the phone. The weight, the materials, the antenna placement, the battery life, had organized itself around that mastery. Software was important, but it was secondary. It was the thing that ran on top of the hardware, not the thing that defined the experience. This is not an unusual error. It is, in fact, the most common error that technically excellent companies make. They optimize for what they already do well. And in doing so, they become less able to see what they don't. In 2003, a company called Apple begins serious development on what it internally calls Project Purple. Nokia does not know this. Nobody outside Apple knows this. And even if they had known, it is not clear that it would have changed anything. Because the threat was not Apple. Not exactly. The threat was a shift in what the phone was for. Steve Jobs announces the iPhone on January 9th, 2007, with a sentence that should have been felt as a seismic event in Espoo, Finland. He says, "We're going to reinvent the phone." The auditorium laughs, and then applauds, and then goes quiet as Jobs begins to explain what he means. The iPhone is not, in its first version, technically superior to Nokia's best smartphones. Nokia's N95, released the same year, has GPS, a better camera, and 3G connectivity that the first iPhone lacks, by conventional measures. The measures Nokia had been using for years. Nokia was still ahead. But Jobs was not competing on conventional measures. He was competing on something that had no established metric. Something that Nokia's engineers, with their tolerance measurements and their patent filings and their supply chain optimization, had no formal way to evaluate. He was competing on the quality of the experience of using the device. When ordinary people, not engineers, not analysts, not industry observers, first held an iPhone and used its touchscreen, something happened that Nokia had not modeled for. They felt something. Not satisfaction with specifications, not respect for engineering competence, something more immediate and harder to articulate. A sense that the device understood them, that it responded to them the way a physical object responds to your hand, with weight and inertia, and a kind of digital physics that felt, against all logic, natural. Nokia's phones were excellent. But Nokia's phones had always asked the user to adapt to the device. The iPhone, for the first time, felt like the device adapting to the user. This distinction sounds small. It is not small. It is everything. Nokia's response to the iPhone is neither slow nor unintelligent. This is one of the most persistent myths about the company's decline. That Nokia failed to recognize the threat. That executives were arrogant, that the engineers were asleep. The reality is more painful than that. Nokia recognized the threat. Nokia had, in fact, built prototypes of touchscreen phones before the iPhone existed. In 2004 and 2005, Nokia had an internal project developing what looked, in some respects, like the device Apple would unveil in 2007. The concept was there. The intention was there. What was not there was the organizational capacity to execute on it. Nokia in 2007 employs roughly 100,000 people. It operates across more than 100 countries. Its product line spanned dozens of devices at different price points, built on different hardware architectures, running different software versions, sold through different carrier relationships in different regulatory environments. The company is not a startup. It is a civilization. And civilizations do not pivot. Unsee is in a product review meeting in late 2007 when someone shows the team a video of an iPhone being demonstrated. The room is quiet afterward in a way that is different from normal quiet. He will later say, "We all knew." We all knew what we were looking at. The question was whether knowing was enough. It was not. Nokia's most fundamental problem in the years following the iPhone's launch is Symbian. Symbian is not a bad operating system. It is, in many respects, an impressive one. Efficient, stable, capable of running on hardware with limited processing power and minimal memory. For the era in which it was designed, it is a genuine achievement. But it is old. Its architecture reflects assumptions about what a mobile operating system needs to do that were reasonable in 1998 and increasingly wrong by 2008. Writing a Symbian application requires a developer to manage memory manually, to navigate an API that evolved over years without consistent design principles, to test against a fragmented ecosystem of hardware variants that each behave slightly differently. Apple's iOS is simpler. Android, which Google releases in 2008, is open and familiar to developers who already know Linux. The result is a software ecosystem gap that Nokia cannot close quickly enough. Nokia attempts a Symbian modernization project that consumes years of engineering effort and billions of euros. The results are improvements without transformation. The fundamental architecture cannot be made to feel new, no matter how new the surface is made to look. There is a moment, documented in internal communications that will later become public, when a senior Nokia software engineer sends a memo describing the situation. The memo uses an analogy that will be quoted many times in the years that follow. He says, "We are standing on a burning platform. The engineer's name is Stephen Elop. He is not Finnish. He is Canadian. He had joined Nokia as CEO 6 months earlier, arriving from Microsoft. And the burning platform memo, as it will come to be known, will mark the beginning of Nokia's most consequential and most contested decision. In February 2011, the same month as the burning platform memo, Nokia and Microsoft announce a strategic partnership. Nokia will abandon Symbian as its smartphone platform and adopt Windows Phone instead. The reaction within Nokia is complex. Some engineers understand the logic. Symbian is not competitive, and building an entirely new operating system in-house is not realistic on the timescale required. Others are devastated. Symbian represents years of work, generations of engineering knowledge, an entire technical culture. Outside Nokia, the reaction is sharper. Analysts debate whether Windows Phone can compete with iOS and Android. Developers already choosing between iOS and Android for their resources wonder if a third platform makes sense. Consumers, increasingly aware of the app ecosystem as a primary reason to choose a phone, wonder what Nokia apps they will actually get. The question that nobody can fully answer, the question that hangs over the entire partnership, is whether Microsoft's software, combined with Nokia's hardware, can produce something that feels as natural as what Apple had created. The answer, it will turn out, is almost, and almost is not enough. The Nokia Lumia devices are genuinely good phones. Their cameras, particularly the Lumia 1020 with its 41-megapixel sensor, are technically superior to anything Apple or Samsung is shipping at the same time. Their hardware design, developed under the supervision of Nokia's industrial design team, which remains one of the best in the world, is striking, confident, physically excellent. But the app ecosystem never comes. The developers never follow. The consumers, standing in carrier stores, looking at shelves where iOS and Android devices have thousands of applications they already use, pick up the Lumia, admire it, and set it back down. Market share, which had been falling steadily since 2007, continues to fall. 2007, Nokia holds 37.8% of the global mobile phone market. 2008, 38.6%, a last high watermark. 2009, 35%. 2010, 32.6%. 2011, 23.8%. 2012, 14.8%. The numbers tell a story of extraordinary speed. Nokia does not erode. It dissolves. But the numbers obscure something important about what is actually happening, because Nokia's decline in smartphones, dramatic, vertiginous, is occurring alongside a more complex situation in the broader mobile phone market, where Nokia's feature phones continue to sell in enormous quantities in developing markets. The story is not one of a company that suddenly stops selling products. It is a story of a company being pushed out of the most valuable part of its market, while holding on for longer than is sometimes remembered in the rest. This matters because it shapes the human dimension of the story. Nokia in 2011, 2012, 2013 is not a failing company in the way that phrase is usually understood. It is a very large company in the middle of a very serious strategic crisis, still generating revenue, still employing tens of thousands of people, still present in the lives of hundreds of millions of users around the world. But it is a company that knows, at the levels where strategic decisions are made, that the trajectory is unsustainable. In January 2008, Nokia announces the closure of its manufacturing facility in Bochum, Germany. 2,300 workers will lose their jobs. The facility has been producing mobile phones since 1990. It is profitable. Nokia's stated reason for the closure is cost competitiveness. Manufacturing in Germany costs significantly more than in Asia. The reaction in Germany is swift and furious. Politicians call for boycotts. The German government, which had subsidized Nokia's expansion in Bochum with public funding, demands repayment. Protesters gather outside the factory gates in the January cold, carrying signs that read, "Nokia, shame on you." Nokia returns the subsidies. The factory closes anyway. Bochum is not the last closure. Over the following 5 years, Nokia will execute multiple rounds of restructuring that collectively eliminate tens of thousands of jobs. Salo, the Finnish town where Anssi began his career, is not spared. The factory there, which at its peak employed thousands of local workers, is gradually wound down. These are not abstract corporate actions. They are the end of working lives that had been organized around a single employer, in a single industry, in a single place. People who had done everything correctly, learned a skill, showed up, done good work, find themselves on the wrong side of a transformation they did not cause and could not have prevented. Anssi takes early retirement in 2012. He is 52 years old. He walks out of the Espoo campus on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when the Finnish trees are turning and the lake is very still. He does not look back. He later says, "I don't regret any of it." You can't regret being part of something that was, for a time, genuinely great. He pauses. But I wish we had seen it coming. I wish any of us had known how to look. On September 3, 2013, Microsoft announces the acquisition of Nokia's Devices and Services division for approximately 5.4 billion euros. The number is significant not for what it is, but for what it isn't. In 2007, Nokia's market capitalization had been approximately 110 billion euros. The devices division, the phones, the brand, the engineering teams, sells for roughly 5% of that. The value destruction is almost incomprehensible in its scale. Stephen Elop, standing at the podium in Espoo, reads a prepared statement. Near the end of it, he deviates slightly from the text. He says, quietly, almost to himself, "We didn't do anything wrong." Then he pauses and adds, "But somehow we lost." The statement will be analyzed and disputed for years. Critics argue that Nokia did many things wrong. That it was too slow to respond to the iPhone, too loyal to Symbian, too cautious in its software investment, and too dependent on hardware excellence at the precise moment when software experience became the primary battleground. Defenders argue that Nokia's collapse was not a failure of strategy in isolation, but a failure of organizational transformation at a pace that no company of its size and complexity could have managed. That the iPhone did not simply offer a better product. It offered a different definition of what a phone was, and adapting to that redefinition requires not just new products, but new institutions. Both things are true. The most honest answer is that the failure had multiple causes, operating at multiple levels, over a period of many years, and that assigning it to a single decision, or a single person, or a single moment, is a way of making the story more manageable than it actually is. The truth is messier. The truth is that Nokia was extraordinary, and then the world changed, and Nokia's extraordinary qualities were precisely what made it hardest to change with it. Microsoft's acquisition of Nokia's devices division does not go well. Within 2 years, Microsoft writes down approximately $7.6 billion related to the acquisition, one of the largest write-downs in the company's history. The Windows Phone platform fails to gain meaningful traction against iOS and Android. The Nokia brand, which Microsoft had acquired the right to use temporarily, is phased out. By 2016, Microsoft has largely exited the smartphone hardware business. The employees who had transitioned from Nokia to Microsoft are, in many cases, let go. The devices and the people and the engineering knowledge that had made Nokia the most dominant consumer electronics manufacturer in history are scattered. To competitors, to startups, to early retirement, to other industries entirely. It is, measured against the scale of what Nokia had been, a remarkably rapid dispersal. But this is not quite the end of Nokia's story, because Nokia, the legal entity, the corporate structure that began with a pulp mill in 1865, did not sell everything. Nokia retained its patents. It retained Nokia Networks, its telecommunications infrastructure division, which builds the towers and the hardware and the software that mobile networks run on. And it retained Nokia Bell Labs, one of the most storied research institutions in the history of technology. The Nokia that exists today is not the Nokia that made phones. It is a different kind of company. A business-to-business enterprise, working in the deep infrastructure of telecommunications, building the 5G networks that will carry other companies' devices, filing the patents that will generate revenue for decades, conducting the kind of fundamental research that rarely makes headlines, but quietly shapes what the future can be. In 2020, Nokia employs approximately 92,000 people across more than 100 countries, generating annual revenues of around 23 billion euros. It is a substantial company. It is not a household name. The transition from consumer icon to infrastructure company is complete, and it is, in its own way, a kind of logic. a return to what Nokia always was before the phones, before the ringtone, before the 40% market share, and the burning platform, and the Microsoft boardrooms. A company that builds the infrastructure through which the world communicates, not the message, the medium. The story of Nokia is, in part, a story about Finland, about what a small, northern, pragmatic country, built from its forests and its cables, and its willingness to concentrate on difficult things. At Nokia's peak, the company's success was so intertwined with Finnish national identity that its decline was felt not merely as a business event, but as something more personal. Finland's extraordinary investment in education, in engineering culture, in the kind of patient, precision-oriented industrial thinking that Nokia exemplified. All of that found its clearest global expression in a company that could fit into a coat pocket. The Nokia decline did not destroy Finland's technology sector. In many respects, it accelerated it. The engineers, the managers, the supply chain specialists, the product designers who left Nokia in the years of decline became the founders and the early employees of a generation of Finnish technology companies. The ecosystem Nokia had seeded, the engineering universities, the component suppliers, the design culture, persisted after Nokia contracted. Helsinki's startup scene in the 2000s owes more to Nokia's collapse than it would be comfortable admitting. The skills diffused outward. The networks remained. The knowledge, which had been concentrated in one place, scattered and took root elsewhere. There is a word in Finnish, sisu. That translates approximately as resilience, as determination in the face of adversity. Finns invoke it carefully, not casually. It describes something specific, not the refusal to feel the weight of difficulty, but the capacity to carry it and keep moving anyway. Nokia's story, understood fully, is a sisu story, not because Nokia survived its decline intact. It did not, but because the people and the knowledge and the culture that Nokia built did survive in dispersed form and went on to build new things. Every business school in the world teaches Nokia as a case study. The lesson they teach varies depending on the professor, the year, the institutional perspective. Some teach it as a story about the dangers of disruption. Some as a story about organizational culture and its resistance to change. Some as a story about the hubris of market dominance. These lessons are not wrong, but they are incomplete. Because the most important thing about Nokia's story is not the failure. The most important thing is the 14-year period from 1994 to 2008, during which Nokia connected more human beings to each other than any company before it. At any price point accessible to ordinary people, in markets that had never before been served by reliable communication technology. In sub-Saharan Africa, Nokia's basic phones allowed communities to coordinate in ways that had been logistically impossible. Farmers could check market prices before deciding whether to transport goods. Medical workers could communicate across distances that would otherwise require hours of travel. Families separated by migration could maintain contact. These are not marketing claims. They are documented, studied, measurable improvements in the quality of human life, delivered by a company that made its phones as rugged and cheap and simple as possible, and then sold them to people who had very little money and needed something that would not break. That achievement does not disappear because Nokia later failed to make a good touchscreen phone. It simply gets less attention because failure is a better story than quiet, persistent, unglamorous good. There is a moment that many former Nokia employees describe in similar terms, using different words. It is the moment, sometime in the early to mid-2000s, when they first understood that what they were building was not just a product, but a layer of human experience, something so embedded in daily life that it had become invisible, like water, like air, like the electrical grid. You feel it when you are traveling somewhere remote, and your Nokia finds a signal. You feel it when you send a text to someone you have not spoken to in months, and they reply within seconds. You feel it when a phone rings in a market in Nairobi or a village in Indonesia, and the person answering it uses a word you don't know for a device whose name in your language was Nokia. That invisibility, that deep integration into the texture of ordinary life, is the thing that cannot be acquired through acquisition or learned from a case study. It is the thing that took Nokia 30 years of industrial history and a precise alignment of timing and geography and talent and focus to achieve. It cannot be recreated. It can only be understood. The company is still there, quieter now, more focused, building the infrastructure for a world that will communicate on speeds and in ways that the Nokia 3310 could not have imagined. Inside those buildings, engineers are working on problems that won't appear in consumer headlines for years. 5G network architecture, signal processing, the mathematics of frequency allocation in a world where every object may eventually carry a radio. They work with the same precision that the engineers in Salo used when they examined circuit boards under magnification in 1989. The same careful attention to tolerances, the same Finnish quality of doing the difficult thing quietly, without announcing it. The signal has changed. The work continues. Nokia Corporation was founded in 1865 as a pulp mill. At its peak, it was the most valuable company in Europe and the most dominant consumer electronics manufacturer on Earth. Between 1994 and 2012, Nokia sold more than 1 billion mobile phones. Today, Nokia employs 92,000 people and operates in more than 130 countries. It does not make phones. It makes the networks that carry them.